Now, it wouldn't be the counter ruck if we didn't talk about the guy that has divided opinion both publicly and on this panel as well, which is the coach, Ian Foster. So, Joy, mate, I'll give you a word, mate, because you haven't always been a fan. But how do you view sort of Foster now? He's copped some criticism, probably more than a lot of other coaches of the All Blacks. He did get, basically he got the All Blacks to within 1 point of being World Cup champions. So, what are your thoughts on Foster and how do you sort of rate his tenure?
That's a bit of a loaded question, but I'll do my best to answer it. From when Foster first took over the reins to now, I wasn't the biggest fan of Ian Foster. And, there's been a few podcasts where I've verbalized my disdain towards the man as a coach, not the man, but as a coach. And my original disdain came from the fact that I was a fan of Dave Rennie, and the fact that Dave Rennie had done what, in my eyes anyway, done what I believed should have been seen as All Black material in terms of coaching. And Foster, in my eyes back then, I felt like he rode on the coattails of coaches around him to eventually become the All Blacks head coach after being in that environment in an assistant coaching role, which obviously seems to be the way to go with the All Blacks coaching role, the head coach role. You've got to be an assistant coach and be in the environment and learn and see how things go. And then if there's enough confidence in you, you get picked. So it's a classic example of don't blame the person being selected, blame the people who selected him. So I, in that respect, I must take back a lot of those sour words that I used towards Fozzie, and it was unfair. Fozzie as a coach has proven during his tenure from the beginning to now that he is a man who, although seemed out of his depth in terms of coaching prowess and pedigree, he's a man who had the respect of his players no matter what All Blacks team he had in front of him. And that counts for something, especially when you've got leadership group like Artie and the senior guys in the team singing your praises time and time again. That speaks to a coach who's not only a coach but a leader. I think he's led these men by creating leaders within that group, within those All Blacks teams over the years, and shown that he has the character to take the abuse that he was given by people like me, that thought he was a subpar coach, and I think he's taken that very well. Unfortunately, his family have been abused as well, and that's very sad that a rugby community would take things into those types of matters where they involve family and loved ones and their vitriol and their trolling. I'm one of the biggest trolls online, but I'd never bring family into it. I go directly at the person if I can, or I just throw back banter when it's given. But I guess in the case of Foster as a coach, my thoughts have changed from my original thoughts where I thought he was a shit coach. I thought, oh my God, he's going to set the All Blacks back a couple of decades because of his lack of results. He was a coach who didn't have head coaching roles that led to Super Rugby titles, although he did have head coaching roles before the All Blacks. I just I wrote him off. I was one of those guys who wrote him off, and I didn't give him a chance. And when he was halfway into the role as an All Blacks coach, I still was throwing stones at him. And it wasn't until probably the last year and a half that I started to change my mind about the guy, just because of what he's been able to endure and the resilience of the man, given all the abuse and public vitriol from the likes of myself. So from a character point of view, I think the man is tough. He's got thick skin. He's obviously been around the environment of Ted and Shag, and he's learned from those guys, and he knows how to engage his players to a level where they can foot it against the best. And the best meaning Ireland, South Africa, France. Even though we lost to France in the first round, I thought, we were definitely in good stead. I thought I actually saw what he saw, and that it was just a hiccup. It's the first round, and we showed in the last World Cup that, we can beat a team in the first round. That team can go on to win the World Cup. We came within 1 point of doing that, or 2 points of doing that, and unfortunately, as luck would have it, the ball bounced the South Africans' way, which was unlucky for Fozzie, who I'm sure would have liked to have walked off into the sunset, even though he said he's going to keep coaching in some capacity. I'm not sure where he's going to land. I personally think he should go to Australia, because, I think Australia could really use his help. They can't do any worse than a Fozzie, because, they've obviously had Eddie Jones, who they thought was going to be the saviour of their game and win the World Cup, and so did I. I made that prediction too, but that was 4 years ago, to my defence.
Yes, yes. I will say something, because I put you on the spot after the 2019 World Cup and said who's going to win the World Cup in 2023, which, there's so much variable factors that can happen in a 4-year period. So one thing I'll give you both credit for is you're happy to put your predictions out there and put it all on the line. So I'll give you credit there. But Roger, I'll come to you, because you're going to have a real interesting perspective on this. Joey has been had his criticisms of Fozzie. I've had my criticisms of Fozzie. The media criticised Fozzie. The public criticised Fozzie. Mark Robinson's criticised Fozzie. New Zealand Rugby hierarchies had criticised Fozzie. But right through all of that, throughout the whole tenure, you've been the one who's sticked up for him. So do you feel justified in what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on Fozzie now? 1 point away from winning a World Cup champion.
Nothing's changed for me in my thoughts of Ian Foster. If anything, admiration sort of increased even more so. Certainly because of the way he's been able to hold himself as a person right through it all. And Joey, you mentioned the thick skin, and I think going into any coaching role that's under the spotlight, that's going to be, going to be scrutinised by members of the public and by the public in general, because of that's basic what rugby fans do, and that's the fanfare and spectatorship. They want to give their opinion, and with social media, there's no other platform that's more accommodating for that. But I think you mentioned that he's got thick skin, and I think he's been able to rise above all of the conjecture, the criticism, the scrutiny. He even mentioned in his final press conference that people have had their own perspectives on the last 4 years, different perspectives of the last 4 years on as to how things have all eventuated. But I think what spoke volumes to me was, despite all of that, he said his role, because being the head coach for the All Blacks, his role was to make sure he could do the best that he could for the team. Regardless of whether people thought that he was the best person for the job, regardless of whether people didn't want him in the role, that was what he said. He said, my role, because he's been appointed as the head coach, was to do the best that he could for the team. And then he was asked also, what was his most proud moment? And this was the day after the Rugby World Cup final. And he said his most proud moment of the All Blacks was last night, at the way that the boys were able to fight tooth and nail and put out a really solid performance despite all the circumstances, despite the variables that happened in that match. And it wasn't about him. It was about what he could do for the best of the team. And the reason why I really backed him was because I felt for the first time that rugby is massive here in our country, in New Zealand, and as it is in other parts of the world. But it was for the first time, because we normally had so much trust. We've had some really good coaches over the last few decades, but never have I seen a coach being thrown under the bus the way that Ian Foster. And I wasn't necessarily a fan of his. I was just standing up for the humanity side of everything. That was the first and foremost. Just for the fact
the
that
Chiefs side of things.
I felt he was hard done by in being dealt a blow, especially when they decided, and it's never happened from my memory anyway, and recollection, that they had appointed another All Black coach during the tenure of the current, and so hence I even backed him even more to get the result. The result we didn't quite get, and he was only 1 point, like you say, away from it. 1 point away from maybe a knighthood. That's the difference.
That's true.
Because he would have had a knighthood. He would have been knighted. He would have been a sir. Sam Cane could have come close to that too.
Right, save it for him. Nah.
But he's not going to get that. But I think through it all, regardless of that, he wasn't in it for those all the accolades. I think it was just that he was trying to do the best for the team. If he was appointed the man to be the head coach, that was his role. He concentrated on the role, regardless of what everyone else thought. And he was saying also that throughout his tenure, every night he was able to, despite it being real difficult with everything that was coming his way, but he had the support of his playing group. Similarly with Sam Cane, regardless of how many times and people making all the noise about Sam Cane not being the best captain or the best person for the captaincy role, he had the support of the leadership group. He had the support of all the All Blacks. So it must be an interesting bubble to be a part of, because regardless of the noise that's on the outside, coming from the fans and coming from all the couch coaches, there's the support group, and that's all that matters. I think, and we've all been in similar predicaments, similar circumstances throughout our own lives, throughout our own working lives as well, and where you feel unsupported, but you've been chosen for that moment. You've been chosen for that time, for that season, to be in whatever role it is, in whatever vocation it is. And you go about it and doing the best that you can with the belief that you are the best person for the role, regardless of the noise around us. And I think Ian Foster doesn't take anything away, and he treats it similarly like that he was going to put his best foot forward while he was the All Blacks coach, and he almost come away with the goods. 1 point away from riding off into that sunset that I was hopefully trying to predict, that he could just, flip the bird to New Zealand rugby for, I think, not necessarily treating him the way, but for allowing that kind of treatment happen to him. First and foremost, not as a person, but, he was still someone's father, husband, someone's brother that all this was happening to, and through it all, he was able to keep calm, composed. The reason why I believe not only did he have the good support around him, but he had good leadership around him too. And also the inclusion of inclusion of Smith and Jason Ryan at the latter stages as well. That enhanced, and it takes a lot to be corrected. It takes a lot to have your administration changed mid-tenure, albeit just before a Rugby World Cup. So again, it shows the character in Foster. And he's probably not going to be the favourite. He probably won't go down in history as one of the All Blacks' favourite coaches by the fans. And the record states as well. And the stats will say a different version as well. And we know that's what he's going to be going down with. A lot of firsts that probably no other coach and no other team, All Blacks team, have endured. But I justify those losses against Ireland, a series loss against Ireland, the losses against Argentina. As I've mentioned before, it comes down to the rest of the world catching up or getting better. I know Stacey doesn't agree with that, but then this Rugby World Cup, basically spells it out clear as day.
You're right.
And so, in coming from, especially from the quarterfinals onwards, but then even in pool play for a team like Australia, regardless of what their form was going in, but they didn't make it out of the pool play. You know, the two-time champions back in the 90s come close to being in a final or two this side of the century. So, you know, things have changed. Teams have improved. A lot of teams are getting better and catching up to the style and the caliber that the All Blacks are. So, despite the results, the All Blacks are still going to be good and powerful and the pinnacle and the benchmark. But teams are improving, and that's what we want at the same time. So the irony is that we do want a more global game. We do want more. We don't want the same 3 or 4 teams vying it out for a Rugby World Cup title. We want it to be competitive. Is it part of it? Is it the luck of the draw? Yeah, maybe the draw and the schedule's being talked about a lot too. But I think going back to Foster, it's just that, you know, this was his tenure. There's going to be a lot said about it. It'd be interesting to read his memoirs. However, I think a lot of his tenure was marred by the fact that we could not accept that the world had caught up.
Yep. Yeah, good thoughts there. Especially that point there you talk about the world has caught up. So you look at those top 4 teams, New Zealand, South Africa, France, and Ireland. Those quarterfinals could have gone completely different. Look at Ireland. That was the only game they've lost this whole year. They won every test. They won the Six Nations, clean swept everyone, beat South Africa, beat Scotland. That was 2 top 5 teams in their own pool, and just lost that quarterfinal. But if they had won that quarterfinal, then they'd probably get Argentina, beat them easily, and get through to the final. France, if they at one point lost to South Africa, then they could have gotten through to the final. It's a completely different game. So on that note, the 4 top teams, it's just whatever happens on the day, anyone can beat anyone. So on that point, I agree. And one thing that Foster doesn't get credit for is his ability to galvanise a team. They got wasted by South Africa. They lose their opening pool game, and everyone's writing them off. And he's like, no, we're going to get together. And then they get all the way to the final. I remember they lost the game against South Africa after their Ireland series, which you talked about earlier. His head's on the chopping block, and they beat South Africa in South Africa when everyone had written them off. So that's one of his strengths, his ability to galvanise a team. So from that perspective, he deserves a lot of credit. And Roger, I'll give you a lot of credit for sticking up for Foster and ultimately being proved right. So I think you were right over this 4-year cycle of us arguing about Foster. But despite saying all of that, I still have mixed feelings. I still have mixed feelings about Foster. Because to me, he overachieved at that World Cup. But, you know, if you look at the expectations of the rugby public and everyone else, you have to give him credit for that. But, you know, home series losses to Ireland, which you talked about, that was our first home series loss. I don't even know in how long, like 100-odd years, whatever.
And you know what?
Biggest ever loss
you know
to
what's
South Africa, the biggest loss in All Black history happened under his was. He lost all 3 games against France, 40% record against Ireland, and 50% against South Africa. Those are the other teams in the top 4. He didn't have a winning record against any of them, and that's who we measure the All Blacks against. So those teams at the top, and he didn't have a winning record. So I give him congratulations.
But all of that would have been pushed aside. All of that would have been pushed aside if it wasn't for a 1-point loss against the Springboks. Had one of that conversion, all the penalty gone over, all of that would have been, you know, just part of the story, getting them to that final result. It didn't quite happen, but I hear what you're saying, Stace. I hear what you're saying, but it's just that
It's
the
true.
total
It's
package,
true.
I suppose. It's just that he was over that. I guess I take that overachieve at this Rugby World Cup, but then who's to say? Because a lot of the English punters are saying that England overachieved
They
to make it
did.
to a semi-final as well. So did Scotland underachieve? Did Ireland underachieve? The Ireland underachieved not getting past the quarterfinal yet again. That's their 9th quarterfinal that they haven't been able to get
In
past.
my opinion, yes, because they were favoured to beat the All Blacks, and that was their only loss all year. So
Yeah,
they were the best team. They're like who the All Blacks used to be. They've been the best team in between World Cups. That's two World Cups in a row where they've come in 2023, 2019, where they were ranked number 1 in the world, and they just haven't been able to
but there'll
kick
be,
on.
you know what will also sort of warrant the results that have happened in Foster's tenure, Stace, is that there's going to be more losses for the All Blacks to endure in the coming years under Robertson. And that's
Well,
just
we'll
going
touch on that. We'll see.
because those losses that are yet to come, but there's still the aura about the All Blacks. However, it's the ever improving global game.
That's
Ireland
right.
is going to continue to improve. The French will continue to improve. Like we only know so much more about our own team because we live, breathe, and eat them here. We see it here, but we don't really see the depth of French rugby that much because of the time difference. Similarly with English, but I guess with FIFA, football, that's how the English Premiership. I believe that it's a filter. It enhances their domestic competition, but it sort of waters down, dilutes their international team because their national side because they can only have so many English players in that tournament, in that competition, because they bring in so many foreigners to boost up these teams, and similarly with the French. So we don't see too much about the French players and their depth, but again, I don't know too much. We only see the ones that they put out, the teams that they put out against in the Six Nations or in the autumn season, autumn tests. But yeah, it'll be an interesting one.
It is interesting because, like, if you talk about not getting sidetracked a little bit, but in New Zealand, our future is aligned with Australia. So for them to not get out of the pool stages, that's disastrous from New Zealand perspective because we play Super Rugby with them. We play 3 Bledisloe Cup tests against them every year.
Yeah.
And we talked about this last week on the pod where you talked about Samoa. You're only as good as the opposition you play against.
The competition that we have, yeah.
So you in New Zealand and in Australia, we talk about the NRL is better and rugby's dying on this side. But if you watch in Europe, man, it's bigger than it's ever been. So that's why they're getting better, they're improving, and all the rest of it. So it's going to get interesting. But I back Robertson anyway.
And the French underachieved too because
yes,
they were touted as home, to be their home tournament. So they had a really good chance. And then to start the way they did with the hiss and a roar against the All Blacks, to beat them there, and then to fall short in the quarterfinal, devastating for them. But that's just the way the draw has worked. I don't know about
and to World Rugby's credit, they've fixed that because that should have been the semis, not the quarters. Those 4 teams should have played each other in the semis. They've done the draw 3 years out, and it turned out to be a disaster. Scotland were ranked 5th in the world, and they couldn't get out of the pool because they were on the same team as number 1 and number 4 in the world. Yeah. Then you get other teams like Wales and that who are like.
Doesn't that just say how flawed this world ranking is as well?
No, it doesn't, because the world rankings today is more relevant than when they did the draw 3 years ago. So at least they've changed that part of it. I'm sort of getting a bit sidetracked. We're talking about Foster, but Joey put up a good point about what where he would like to see Foster. And Eddie Jones has moved on, and there's a vacancy with Australia.
He thinks that
might be a good thing. But Rog, mate, where would you like to see Foster end up after? I think today is his last day officially as All Black coach.
I think I'd like to see him just enjoying the sunshine in some tropical island, sipping on a margarita or two for now. I don't think giving him the poisonous chalice of Australia would be a good sort of chapter for him. I don't know. Maybe he might do well over there, but it just seems like we've had Robbie Deans, then we've had Dave Rennie, and then we're going to throw Ian Foster over there in the hat as well. I don't know. I think if anything,
Dave Rennie they should have kept him, and then
if anything, Dave Rennie,
CEO's got to go.
Yeah, I've got a little bit to say about that, but on Ian Foster, I don't know where he could. Obviously, the world's his oyster at this time in his rugby coaching career. Only reason why I say that.
You're a prisoner of the moment. Don't forget the previous 3 years.
Yeah.
Carry on.
But I'm thinking, with the result that he's had, he will have a few offers knocking on his door. And it doesn't have to necessarily be of a national side. It could just be of a club side somewhere in Europe. Because I think, but then I heard there's something with Smith going to somewhere.
Please say the Blues. No, I don't know where he's going.
I think offshore. Someone's going to Italy. Who's going to Italy? Might be Schmidt.
Maybe.